low-pressure hydraulic circuit on 50 series row crop tractors has several features that make it different from the low-pressure circuit on 40 series row crop tractors. Knowing these new features will help you service the hydraulic system on 50 series tractors more effectively and efficiently. First, we'll introduce these features. All 50 series row crop tractors have return oil filters. This filter accepts the oil returning from the rock shaft and SCV functions. 40 series row crop tractors with power shift transmissions have return oil filters, but 40 series quad range tractors do not. On the 50 series, both types have return oil filters. 50 series tractors have a return oil manifold in the low pressure circuit. The return oil manifold directs oil flow several different ways depending on the tractor's operating condition. 50 series tractors have a 4-stage filter relief valve for the transmission oil filter. The 4-stage relief valve warns the operator when the transmission filter becomes restricted. That 4-stage relief valve is also part of the maintenance circuit, a new circuit on 50 series tractors. The maintenance circuit provides unfiltered oil to operate the transmission during a cold startup or when the filter becomes restricted. The maintenance circuit also allows a small amount of oil to flow to lube and to the main hydraulic pump. A thermal bypass valve hooked in parallel with the oil cooler helps during cold startups. It allows oil to bypass the cooler until the oil is warm enough to flow easily through the cooler. The low-pressure circuits on 50 series tractors with quad range or power shift transmissions are virtually identical in terms of how they function. However, the location of components varies slightly depending on which transmission the tractor has. In this program, we'll be using a series of diagrams to show you how oil flows through the low-pressure circuit. These diagrams are based on the quad-range low-pressure circuit, but the power shift low-pressure circuit is functionally the same. We'll point out the differences between quad-range and power shift-equipped tractors and show you where the low-pressure circuit components are located. The transmission pump draws oil through a screen from the transmission case reservoir. Oil flows to the filter relief valve housing. This housing contains the 4-stage relief valve, which has two functions. One, it is to warn the operator when the transmission filter becomes restricted. Two, it bypasses oil through the maintenance circuit for transmission operation. The pressure regulating valve maintains a pressure of 175 psi or 1200 kilopascal. Oil at this pressure is used to operate the transmission controls. The 4th stage of the pressure regulating valve acts as the cooler relief valve. If pressure exceeds 195 psi or 1350 kilopascal, the valve shifts and dumps oil to sump. Oil flows to the oil cooler and thermal bypass. When the oil is cold and thick, a temperature-sensitive valve in the bypass allows oil to flow around the cooler. As the oil warms up, more of it flows through the cooler. As shown here, oil flows from the bypass to the auxiliary reservoir and then to the main pump. On some tractors, oil flows directly from the thermal bypass to the main pump. Functionally, both arrangements work the same. High-pressure oil from the main hydraulic pump flows to the pressure control valve. The PCV sends oil to priority functions: power steering, power brakes, differential lock, and hydro-cushioned seat. The rock shaft and SCV are non-priority functions. Return oil from the rock shaft and SCV functions flows to the return oil filter. The return oil filter housing has a relief valve in it which dumps oil to sump if the filter becomes restricted. Filtered oil flows to the return oil manifold. Return oil from steering flows to the return oil manifold. It's not filtered because there's very little risk of steering oil becoming contaminated. Of all the priority functions, only return oil from steering goes to the return oil manifold. Return oil from the other functions goes to sump. Under most operating conditions, the return oil manifold directs oil to lubricate transmission parts. Lube circuit oil comes from either the auxiliary reservoir or the return oil circuit. Lube pressure is maintained by the lube relief valve, which is located in the filter relief valve housing. A line from the housing to the return oil manifold connects the valve to the lube circuit. A line from the filter relief valve housing to the pressure regulating valve completes the low pressure circuit. This line, along with several other lines already shown, is part of the maintenance circuit. The next series of diagrams will show you how oil flows between the components in the low pressure circuit. As an overview, the diagrams will not show the internal working parts of the valves and manifold. If you need that information, consult the hydraulics section of your technical manual. Remember, these diagrams are based on the quad-range low-pressure circuit. The power shift low-pressure circuit is functionally the same, but has some minor differences. Under most typical conditions, oil flows from the transmission pump through the transmission filter to the pressure regulating valve. Oil not required for transmission operation flows to the oil cooler and then to the main pump. Any oil the main pump doesn't use goes to the auxiliary reservoir and then to the return manifold. That oil goes through the manifold to the lube circuit. The lube relief valve in the filter relief valve housing maintains lube pressure and dumps excess oil to sump. If the rock shaft, or SCV, is used, return oil goes through the return oil filter and enters the return oil manifold. Return oil from steering goes directly to the manifold. The lube circuit uses as much of this return oil as it needs. Any excess oil dumps to sump through the lube relief valve in the filter relief valve housing. Under some operating conditions, the main pump may need more oil than the transmission pump can provide. Using several hydraulic functions at the same time could cause such a condition. In that case, function return oil flows through the manifold to the auxiliary reservoir, where it can be used by the main pump. This arrangement ensures that the main pump will get all the oil it needs. This is one key part of the low-pressure circuit on 50 series tractors. Oil can flow in either direction in the line between the auxiliary reservoir and the return oil manifold. If the main pump has an adequate oil supply, excess oil goes to the return oil manifold. If the main pump doesn't get enough oil from the transmission pump, filtered return oil flows from the return oil manifold. The other key part of the 50 series low-pressure circuit is the maintenance circuit. The maintenance circuit comes into use when the transmission filter becomes restricted. It's also used during cold startups when the oil is too thick to pass through the transmission filter. The maintenance circuit is not really a separate circuit. It consists of one additional line and uses lines from other circuits. As we mentioned earlier, the transmission filter has a 4-stage relief valve. Normally, when the filter is not restricted, the relief valve is in stage 1 and oil flows through the filter to the pressure regulating valve. When the filter starts to become restricted, the relief valve senses the pressure difference between the filter's inlet and outlet and shifts to stage 2. On tractors equipped with Investigator 2 warning systems, stage 2 turns on a warning light. There is no warning light on tractors equipped with gauge cluster instrumentation. As the filter becomes more restricted, the pressure differential between filter inlet and outlet becomes greater, and the relief valve shifts to stage 3. With Investigator 2 systems, stage 3 turns on a stop engine warning light. On tractors with gauge clusters, stage 3 turns on a red transmission oil light. In this stage, a small amount of unfiltered oil flows to the pressure regulating valve through the maintenance circuit. The pressure regulating valve is controlled by pressure in the line from the transmission filter. As the filter becomes restricted, the pressure regulating valve shifts to its first stage. This stage allows unfiltered oil from the maintenance circuit to be used for transmission control at a lower pressure. As the filter becomes even more restricted, the relief valve shifts to stage 4. At this stage, the relief valve allows a small amount of unfiltered oil to flow to the return oil manifold. From the manifold, unfiltered oil flows to the lube circuit, and a very small amount flows to the auxiliary reservoir. There it can be used by the main pump to provide oil for the brakes and power steering. When the filter becomes restricted, the relief valve doesn't stay in stage 4. The pressure regulating valve modulates, moves back and forth, to maintain a pressure of 145 psi or 1,000 kilopascal in the transmission control circuit. The relief valve also modulates between stage 3 and 4, so the flow of oil to the return oil manifold is intermittent. As we said before, the maintenance circuit operates the same way during a cold startup. The cold, thick oil cannot pass through the transmission filter, so the maintenance circuit opens to provide lubrication and control oil. There's a temperature override on the warning system. The override prevents the warning lights from coming on during a cold start. Let's take a few seconds to review oil flow in the low-pressure circuit. Under normal operating conditions, the return oil manifold sends oil to the lube circuit. Oil for lube comes from either the auxiliary reservoir or the return oil circuit. Excess oil is dumped to sump by the lube relief valve in the filter relief valve housing. If the operator is making heavy use of the hydraulic functions, the main pump might need more oil than the transmission pump can provide. Under these conditions, the return oil manifold sends filtered return oil directly to the auxiliary reservoir. When the transmission filter becomes restricted, the maintenance circuit comes into effect. The 4-stage filter relief valve shifts to stage 3 and lets a small amount of unfiltered oil flow to the pressure regulating valve. The pressure regulating valve senses that the filter is restricted and shifts to let the unfiltered oil go to the transmission control circuit. As the filter becomes even more restricted, the filter relief valve and the pressure regulating valve modulate to maintain a steady pressure in the transmission control circuit. In this way, the maintenance circuit provides oil for transmission control, lube, and minimal operation of the high-pressure circuit. Now that you've seen how the oil flows through the low-pressure circuit, we can show you what the main components look like and where they're located. Tractors with quad range are very similar to tractors with power shift, so we'll show you a quad range tractor first and then point out the differences on a power shift tractor. Oil flows from the charge pump to the filter relief valve housing, which is located on the lower left side of the transmission case. Notice the wires that go from the 4-stage filter relief valve to the warning system in the instrument panel. The transmission filter itself is located just forward of the filter relief valve housing. From the transmission filter, oil flows to the pressure regulating valve located on the left side of the clutch housing. Oil flows on to the oil cooler at the front of the tractor. The thermal bypass is connected parallel to the oil cooler. The auxiliary reservoir is also located at the front of the tractor. The size and shape of the auxiliary reservoir, along with its connecting hoses, varies from model to model because of space limitations. Return oil flows from the rock shaft and SCV to the return oil filter on the lower left-hand side of the transmission case. The return oil manifold is located on the upper left side of the transmission case. This cutaway view shows the internal components of the return oil manifold. It has 2 check valves and a screen. On tractors with power shift, the charge pump is an external gear pump mounted on the rear side of the pressure regulating valve housing. Another difference on power shift tractors is that the maintenance circuit, pressure regulating valve, and filter relief valve are all located in the traction clutch valve housing. The return filter relief valve housing on 50 series tractors with power shift is located inside the transmission case, the same as 40 series tractors. The power shift return oil manifold is the same as the one on quad range tractors, except that it has an oil line running down to lube the mechanical front wheel drive and PTO. Quad range tractors don't have this line because mechanical front wheel drive is not available with a quad range transmission. Both quad range and power shift tractors come from the factory with 3 14mm diagnostic receptacles. One is mounted on the pressure regulating valve. It senses transmission control pressure. There's also one on the return oil manifold. It senses lube pressure. And the third one is on the pressure control valve in the high pressure circuit. It senses standby pressure. There are many other pressure testing ports in the hydraulic system that can be equipped with diagnostic receptacles. Check your technical manual for the location of these ports. That concludes our overview of the low-pressure circuit on 50 series row crop tractors. You've seen how oil flows through the circuit, and you've seen where the major components are located. If you need more specific information about the low-pressure circuit, consult the hydraulics section of your technical manual.